Just 3 days before early voting begins in Georgia, Senate candidates Raphael Warnock and Herschel Walker faced off tonight in a highly anticipated debate. Here is just some of what happened.
Did President Biden defeat former President Donald Trump in 2020?
President Biden won and Senator Warnock won. That's the reason I decided to run.
A former girlfriend made public accusations saying you paid for an abortion and that you encouraged her to have another.
I said that's a lie. And on abortion, I'm a Christian. I believe in life. And I tell people this, Georgia is a state that respects life, and I'll be a senator that protects life. And I said that was a lie, and I'm not backing down.
The women of Georgia deserves a senator who will stand with them. I trust women more than I trust politicians. One thing I have not done, I've never pretended to be a police officer, and I've never threatened a shootout with the police.
I am with many police officers, and at the same time,
Mr. Walker, you are very well aware of the rules tonight.
Yes.
And you have a prop.
Yes.
That is not allowed, sir.
Recent polling shows the incumbent Democratic senator holds a 7-point lead over his Republican challenger. With us for more, Greg Bluestein, a political reporter for the Atlanta Journal-Constitution and an MSNBC political contributor. He's also the author of Flipped: How Georgia Turned Purple and Broke the Monopoly on Republican Power. And Julian Castro, former HUD secretary and 2020 Democratic candidate for president. It's good to see you both. All right, Greg, your big takeaways from this debate.
Well, if this was a make or break moment for Herschel Walker, he didn't break. He had some rough moments. He didn't break. And to some supporters, he emerged even stronger. But at the same time, Senator Warnock's campaign scored some key points, as you just saw, with some zingers that he can highlight to his supporters to raise some money and to energize his backers.
Tell me what you think those zingers were that landed.
Well, the one that we just saw, where he highlighted two of Herschel Walker's biggest vulnerabilities in one fell swoop. One, Herschel Walker's lie that he served in law enforcement. And secondly, his history of violence against women, including threatening a shootout with police, which undercuts Herschel Walker's support for law enforcement.
Yeah, Julian, I am curious, watching this race generally, watching this debate tonight, how much of it is going to come down to national politics, to the way that voters are feeling about the economy, to the way that they are feeling as a response to the Dobbs decision? How much of it is going to come down to these candidates themselves, the things we have learned about Herschel Walker in the last few weeks? And how much of it's going to come down to dynamics in the state of Georgia? Your sense as you watch this unfold about what's really going to be on voters' top of mind as they begin to vote this Monday?
I mean, whether we're talking about Georgia or Arizona, Nevada, a number of other states, a lot of it has to do with national politics, how well President Biden is doing, how well people feel the economy is doing, and a number of other issues. So, yes, what we've seen over the last few years is that these elections are more and more nationalized. It's also true that, especially in a state like Georgia, it's going to be a very close race. And when you have a very close race, that means that all of the other things that you mentioned, Alicia, come into play, including, of course, candidate quality. And unfortunately for the GOP, they just have a terrible candidate here. Going into this debate, Herschel Walker took the George W. Bush playbook of trying to set the expectations so low. I mean, he set them like, underneath Dante's ninth circle of hell or something. And he barely, I think, came out of there meeting that expectation. He came close to breaking, to use Greg's terminology, when he took a fake badge out to try and, I guess, reinforce the point that he had worked with police. He really, he didn't have a huge mistake, but I don't think he did himself any favor. And the polls have consistently shown over the last few weeks that Raphael Warnock has built a small but steady lead. I think that nothing that happened tonight is going to change that.
Greg, something I found interesting, Yamiche Alcindor, our colleague, was in Georgia talking to voters a few days after some of these stories had begun to emerge about Herschel Walker. And people who were Walker supporters, they really seemed to be pretty unmoved by these revelations. And I thought it was interesting tonight that Warnock really didn't touch the personal accusations, stayed pretty far from them. And I wonder what you made of that dynamic.
Yeah, and that was no surprise, because on the campaign trail, Senator Warnock has hardly talked about it. He's only really talked about those abortion allegations when pressed by reporters, and when he says that they're disturbing, they're part of a disturbing pattern, but he highlights his stance on supporting abortion rights, and then he kind of shifts the subject. And that's part of his strategy. He's worried about energizing Republicans by intervening in this scandal and giving Republicans a way to unify around a shared enemy in him. And so he's been steering clear. But what he hasn't steered clear of at all is those allegations of violence, the threats that Herschel Walker has leveled against his ex-wife, Cindy Grossman, and other women in his past that came up prominently in tonight's debate.
Julian, it's funny, when we talk about states that have big Latino populations, we often talk about Florida, we talk about Texas, Arizona, and Nevada. Georgia is a state that has an emerging Latino electorate. I want to look at some new polling. This is national polling on Hispanic voters. Support for Democrats in Congress at 63%. It's a big number, but it is less than in previous years, kind of mirrors what we've been seeing from polling, which is that Democratic numbers are softer than Dems would want them to be, but Republicans have not been able, Julian, to seal the deal.
Well, they haven't been. And as you mentioned, it's a great poll, but the caveat here, it did not delve into individual states, right? So there is a growing, sizable Latino population in Georgia. It has also been organized, at least on the Democratic side, and it was key to helping to put Ossoff and Warnock over the top in those runoffs. And so the poll is instructive, I think, though, that Latinos are thinking about the economy. They're thinking about the issue of abortion. One of the more surprising findings in the poll was that Latinos had, by 28 points, more confidence in Democrats on the issue of abortion. That flies in the face of the conventional wisdom of what most people think about the Latino community. All of those issues are going to be relevant here. In the debate tonight, for instance, Raphael Warnock made the contrast very clear. Herschel Walker doesn't support any exceptions to a total ban on abortion, and he's going to protect the right of women to choose.
And this contrast, do you trust politicians or do you trust women to make these decisions? Greg, before we go, I got about a minute left. Give us an update on the Fulton County investigation. Where does it stand?
Well, it is sort of not really on a pause, but you're not going to see too much news until after the election. The subpoenas are still being filed. There's still activity behind closed doors, but there's not going to be a huge major development. Part of a pre-existing agreement from Fulton County prosecutors not to make big news before the midterm.
Greg Bluestein, Julian Castro, as always, thank you both.